Kia ora, everyone, and welcome to Cobblestones Chronicles. And I have a treat today because I found an old copy of the Cobblestones Chronicle, a newspaper. And if you are watching on TV, I'm holding it up. You can see it, might be able to see it's a bit yellow. And this was done. It's lovely. It's items compiled from historical newspapers, and it was done by Greytown JCs. And they were obviously, they were doing it as a fundraiser. And so what they did was they found some old newspaper articles, and there's just some lovely ones, and there's some old ads in this as well, including a delightful one for Warner's rust-proof corsets suited to all forms. The corset beautiful makes a beautiful figure, and I have to say that with the wasp waist that is shown in these drawings, it doesn't look as if it would be very comfortable. I'm holding it up if you're watching on TV so you can have a look at these wasp waists. A bit scary. I can't imagine what they'd be like. So I thought I'd read you out some of the articles from this morning, and then I've also got, because it's from two newspapers, it was the Cobblestones, no, what was it? Oh, I'll find out later in a moment what it was. And I got hold of an excellent booklet by Carterton District Historical Society, which is the Carterton Heritage Walk. And I thought I'd just identify some of the interesting buildings in Carterton by talking about the Heritage Walk and a little bit about Charles Rookin Carter as a follow-up from last week, where I talked a bit about the gum trees and the gum trees that came to Carterton. So it's a cold day today. Last night it was -1 outside in our garden, according to our weather station. I didn't have to go outside to find out it was -1, thank goodness. But I have to say that the dogs and the cat, when they did their final bathroom walk before we all went to bed, they were very fast at it last night. And I had to practically throw the cat out the door before it grumbled and came back. So I hope you're all listening to this in a warm and cozy place and looking after yourselves. So I thought first, but before I get into this, I might play a song. And I've got a lovely CD here called Row Out to Your Ship of Dreams by Nigel Parry. And Nigel is somebody that we know. He sometimes plays and sings with my husband. And this is one that he wrote, A Ship of Dreams. And it's about, don't stand there waiting for your ship of dreams forevermore. So here we go, Ship of Dreams.
Go out to your ship of dreams. Time to leave the shore. Row out to your ship of dreams. Don't stand there waiting for your ship of dreams forevermore. If you have a song you'd like to sing, just step right up and share it with the world. There's music in your dreams and soul in every note and every word. Go out to your ship of dreams. Time to leave the shore. Row out to your ship of dreams. Don't stand there waiting for your ship of dreams forevermore. If there is a soul, someone in your world, do they know how much they mean and how you feel? Why hide behind your fear? You'll often lose a soul that's never told. Go out to your ship of dreams. Time to leave the shore. Row out to your ship of dreams. Don't stand there waiting for your ship of dreams forevermore. If there is a place somewhere in your soul, a place that would bring meaning to your world, start making travel plans, and the journey will be just as great a part. Go out to your ship of dreams. Time to leave the shore. Row out to your ship of dreams. Don't stand there waiting for your ship of dreams forevermore. You may find your ship of dreams in your heart and in your soul, in your own distant horizon that's inside. leave the fool's gold. Only your ship can reach your rainbow's end. Go out to your ship of dreams. Time to leave the shore. Row out to your ship of dreams. Don't stand there waiting for your ship of dreams forevermore.
Ship of Dreams by Nigel Parry, and the guitar is by Graham Ward. It's lovely, lovely song with a beautiful melody. I think it's particularly lovely, encouraging us to row out to our ship of dreams. And of course, that's exactly what our early settlers did, wasn't it? They were dreamers who came out to the Wairarapa and settled themselves down, and they weren't dreamers who looked into the distance and didn't do anything. They were practical dreamers who had a ship to get here, metaphorically, and they rowed out and got on with it, rolled up the sleeves and got on with it. They were fantastic. So, although from the Cobblestones Chronicle, which was produced in the 1970s, imagine a time in March 1854, the Hutt Valley Road and the travellers who received poor comfort from a workman there were a small party of pioneers under the leadership of Thomas Kempton and his son, Mr. and Mrs. Malls, Ben Stevens, and the Reverend Mr. Bruff. They were the first group to establish a settlement in the Wairarapa under the small farm scheme. The settlers had heard reports of Robert Stokes, who entered the wire drop, as it was called, by crossing the ranges in 1841. He said, "An immense plain lay at our feet, a land of groves and belts of trees, such as are found only in the best soil." He praised the plentiful game, the friendly maoris, the good rivers, and above all, the speedy communication. One might travel to the plains in a day and a half by road, or in 6 hours round the coast, he wrote, but this claim was proved wrong many times. Access to the Wairarapa has been an age-old problem. The first New Zealand company who founded a settlement at Port Nicholson, what is of course now Wellington, soon discovered a disadvantage. They had a magnificent harbour, but limited hinterland for grazing and sowing their crops. Beyond the ranges lay an ideal place, the Wairarapa Plains, so near and yet so far across those ranges. A Dr. Diefenbach, an explorer naturalist, climbed Mount Hector in 1840 and caught the first glimpse of tracts of bush and swampy flaxland. He had reported a proper survey would reveal a possible route over the ridges between the Rimatakas and the Tararuas. But before this can be accomplished, 40 miles of road will have to be constructed through dense bush and over mountain ridges. The cost of undertaking this was beyond a small colonial settlement. But pioneers had found another way to the Wairarapa around the coast, from the site of the present Pencarrow Lighthouse past Orongorongo Station to Palliser Bay. Bidwell, Clifford and Vavasseur had used this track made by the Maoris, and they established the country's first sheep station by 1844. 2 years later, there were at least 12 stations on the East Coast and in the Lower Valley. Although this means of access required no construction, it did have its disadvantages. Mobs of sheep were washed out to sea when caught by the tide, and the greatest hazard was the Mucka Mucka rocks, which Charles Rookin Carter described as huge, perpendicular and overhanging, projecting from the hills far into the sea. So it took a little bit more than 6 hours to get round the coast. Otherwise, we'd probably still be doing it. The barrier of the ranges remained a challenge to explorers, surveyors and pioneers. More settlers made their homes in the Hutt Valley, and the increased population to the north made construction of a Wellington Wairarapa hill through the roads a necessity. Charles Kettle, Samuel Breeze and Mr. H. Tiffin followed Stokes' example, making separate expeditions to find a route through the ranges. These excursions were no Sunday picnic. The early explorers penetrated dense bush, flooded rivers and boggy swamps thick with mosquitoes. The party which suffered the most miserable experiences was that led by Charles Kettle, who became hopelessly lost trying to return from the Manawatu through the Wairarapa to the Hutt Valley. The trip lasted a month. They ran out of food and were reduced to eating raw potatoes. Unluckily, they had chosen the winter of 1842 for their expedition. Days were passed by the hungry travellers camped on the banks of swollen rivers, waiting in heavy rain for floodwaters to subside. It needs a stretch of the imagination to visualise the explorers crossing the Waiohine by gripping poles held above their heads. After travelling for 3 days in wet clothes, they suffered another wetting in the Teheranuka. Then they came to the greatest problem of the expedition, finding a gap through the Rimatakas. Although tempted to turn to the east and return home by the comparatively easy coast road, Kettle decided to push on through the ranges, as the main purpose of their journey was finding a new route through to the Hutt Valley. The explorers wasted much time following streams through the ranges, finding themselves locked in dead-end, precipitous gullies and having to retrace their steps. Desperately, they tackled the slopes, but surrounded by bush and giant trees, they couldn't even see the skyline. Rain fell incessantly, and the rough huts they built on the side of the ranges didn't provide much shelter. But at least they were well fed, as there was lots of wild pork on the hills. When at last the weather cleared, a Maori guide with the party, Ehau, who had previously crossed the ranges from the Hutt Valley side, led the explorers to an old Maori track, probably the same one as used by Stokes a year earlier. The general health of the party is now bad, Kettle recorded. Eating fresh killed pork without salt and too much cold water has caused trouble. One of our number, Alexander Grant, is in a very serious condition. After crossing several spurs, they came to the Pukuratahi River, which they knew flowed into the Hutt. Rather than risk losing sight of it in the bush, they waded along the river in freezing temperatures until they reached the Hutt Valley and staggered to the nearest station. Although their expedition was made under the worst possible conditions, they succeeded in proving that there was no easy access from the Hutt to Wairarapa. The road must be built over the ridges from the Pakuratahi. Well, that's a bit exciting. I think I'll play you a road song to recover from the thought of clambering over the Rimataka Ranges, because I often drive over them, of course, if I'm going into Wellington, but oh my goodness, walking over them. I have done a little tramping in the ranges, but not much, I must admit. they look far too forbidding. So I've got a little song now called Serendipity. It's by Joe Sheffield, and it's from a CD called Gypsy Mind. It's a true story. I know Jo, and she told me this is a true story. She met this old man in the song, and he offered her a ride, and she talked to him all the way when they were going into town, and it actually set her thinking about what do you need in life? All you need is a shelter, bed, and meals. So a shelter, bed, and food. And that's what she feels are the most important things in life. And I know she loves to go adventuring in her caravan. So here we go with Serendipity.
Sometimes a chance encounter sends us on our way with a message of enlightenment. That's serendipity. That's serendipity. When I was only 18, I thought I knew it all. So much of life is unforeseen without a crystal ball. Without a crystal ball. I waited at a bus stop, bound for Huddersfield. An old traveller stopped beside me and offered me a ride. He offered me a ride. He drove an ancient charabanc. It was his house on wheels. That day I learned that all you need is shelter, bed and meals. Shelter, bed and meals. That was 40 years ago. My memory has degraded, but I recall the journey oh so slow. But your picture has faded. That was the only time we met. I used to always dream I'd see you somewhere down the line to share what we both learned. To share what we both learned. You must be long gone now, your home decayed to rust, but your legacy lives on in me. For you gave me my wanderlust. The lesson that you showed me stays with me to this day. A memory that is part of me, although I'm far away. So very far away. Sometimes a chance encounter sends us on our way with a message of enlightenment. That's serendipity. That's serendipity.
Serendipity by Joe Sheffield. that she wrote herself, a true story. So continuing with the Cobblestones Chronicles, in the mid-40s saw the completion of the main task of the explorers and surveyors, whose courage and endurance made settlement possible in the Wairarapa. By this time, the district was settled by run holders, and later in the mid-50s, the small farm settlers arrived. But before the small farm families struggled over the hill, their precious goods strapped on the back of bullocks, another group of pioneers made access possible. They were the road makers. So one of them was Henry Burling. He was a bushwhacker, a giant of man with an immense bushy beard. He had been the mail carrier between Wellington and Wanganui, travelling on foot with his postbag. And it was all in the day's work to swim several rivers with his bag and his clothes strapped onto his head. He was the overseer of a gang of roadmen who cut the bush track over the Rimatakas. The sight of the plains and the lake below inspired him to become the first settler to make a home at the foot of the hills. The bridle track, narrow, steep and winding, was an impossible route for his 70 head of cattle, so Henry Burling drove along the coast road, the usual access for run holders, to his Maori leased land, which extended from Abbott's Creek to the Teharanika River and Lake Wairarapa. If you think about it, that's a large area. He says, "Never before had my sons seen so much flat land in their lives." But his property could only be reached by a tortuous route in 1846. From the coast, he drove his stock up the eastern side of the lake as far as C.R. Bidwell's station. Through a track, he cut himself to Morrison's Bush and then back through another self-made track to the site, which is, of course, now Featherstone. Burling was not the town's first settler, but also the host of the first accommodation house on the Wairarapa side of the Rimatakas. The settlement was known as Burling's until renamed after the provincial superintendent of Wellington, Dr. Isaac Featherstone. The Featherstone Borough and County Pensioner Flats now bear his name. But back to Burling. He lost no time in widening the tracks which he had cut into roads wide enough for four-wheel traffic, and he organised a transport service through the lower valley and round the coast. Before the 1855 earthquake ruined anchorage at Tikopi, he shipped bales of wool from Palliser Bay. Sir George Grey made Burling responsible in 1851 for keeping the hill track clear for horse traffic for the annual sum of £50. But the following year, Burling's bush licence for his well-known accommodation house was refused, despite petitions from local settlers. Perhaps his application was turned down because Sir Donald Maclean, the Crown Commissioner, complained of the miserable accommodation amongst fleas at Burling's. Oh dear. The travellers who really appreciated the hospitality at Burling's were the pioneer families who came over the hill. We reached Featherstone after a hard journey over the Rimatakas and put up for the night at Burling's, which, although very rough, was acceptable, recorded Mary Ann Irons, granddaughter of Joseph Masters, the founder of Masterton. Her brother, Joseph Irons, was given a more detailed account of the journey. He said, "We left Wellington by cart and horse and were ferried over the Hutt River in a punt. From thence to the Wairarapa, there being at the time," this is 1855, "only a track over the hills, my brother and I were put into hampers and carried over by pack bullocks, the other members of the family walking. the pack bullocks still carrying our belongings. So obviously they were young and not very, this would be Joseph, wasn't very big at that stage. The stages were fairly short and arduous. We had to find our way through dense scrub, bush, swamp, creeks and rivers, oftentimes being held up for some time in getting out of bogs and fording rivers. After 4 days we arrived at Greytown and then through Papawai, coming out at Taratahi, where Parkville now is. At this stage, Mr. Masters met us with a bullock cart of his own make and took us aboard, and that ride was greatly enjoyed. We arrived at our destination, Masterton, at midnight, all thoroughly tired and knocked up. Oh my goodness, it really was a very busy time. Okay, another piece of music. And I thought this one was very appropriate because really the Rimatakas are kind of a borderline. And I thought, oh, let's have a bit of Rai Cooder and borderline. So here we go. Borderline. Borderline by Rai Cooder. I thought that was a bit appropriate because it was the Rimatakas were the border, of course, and that's what I'm talking about this morning. So, continuing on the stories of going over the Rimutakas. When the Chamberlain family reached Masterton in the same year as the earlier settlers, they realised how badly they needed a cart in their new home. And 2 young brothers returned to Wellington to purchase one. But the track was over the Rimutakas was still too narrow for a cart, and the boys had to pull it to pieces, carry the timber, and trundle the wheels over the hills until their arms ached in their sockets. Even when they reached the plains and put the vehicle together again, they faced another problem. The blinking cart became stuck in the swamps, which they had to fill with boulders to try and get the cart across. Certainly the trip across the hill was a never-to-be-forgotten experience. But when a young woman attempted it, alone, that account surely took pride of place in the family stories. Sally Amy Bowler, as a 17-year-old, rode on her own horse from Masterton to Wellington to deliver a freshly broken-in horse to Sir George Grey. Riding her own and leading the other horse, she swam across several rivers and took 3 days to cross the bridle track. And there was also the quiet determination of Mrs. Irons, who left her young family and returned to Wellington at her husband's death to hear his will. She rode to Wellington and back alone, returning with letters in her pocket. And that was the first Wairarapa mail, and appropriately she was appointed Masterton's first postmistress. And then again, Greytown historians claim that Samuel Oates brought the first mail over. But both trips were made in the same year, 1856, and family records don't record the exact month. But it was pretty cool that they went over and brought the mail back. And they had been with a friend, Mr. Fairweather, who took turns in pulling and pushing. It was amazing that they managed the wheelbarrow. Oates, of course, was taking the trip to investigate some property at Parkvale, where Charles Rooke and Carter had bought a block of land. And last week we talked about the story of the eucalyptus tree, which were trees which were released, shall we say, from the wheelbarrow as they passed through Greytown. One fine morning, it was a splendid sight for the early risers to see a coach leave Dixon's accommodation house in Masterton at 6:30 a.m., the horses' coats gleaming, the coaches brightly polished, with the familiar words Cobb and Co.'s telegraph line of Royal Mail coaches on the side of the vehicles. The first change of horses was made at Greytown, the centre of the service, where Hastwell had built his home and stables, and with a clatter of hoofs on the cobblestones and a jingle of harnesses, the horses would pull up at the depot, and passengers on the long return trip to Masterton would call at the Rising Sun Hotel directly opposite while the last relay of horses was being harnessed. By the late 1860s, Hastwell employed 36 drivers and stabled at Greytown over 70 horses, which were used in relays at 15-mile intervals. Bullock teams served the outlying districts, and conditions became more comfortable for passengers when the Cobb brothers introduced the light Concorde coaches, advertised as the only perfect passenger vehicle for travelling ever built. Don't know if we'd still say that today, but it's interesting that that's the start of Cobblestones Museum, because Cobblestones Museum is built on the site of the original Hastwell stables. And the Hastwell business was started in 1856, centred in Greytown. He had operated a fortnightly bullock or horse-drawn freight service between Wellington and Masterton, delivering the mail to Wairarapa settlers for nothing. The Wellington Provincial Council had promised to grant him £25 for a year's mail delivery, but 3 years later, Hastwell was still writing to the council to ask when this compensation would be paid. Poor Hastwell, he did tender for a fortnightly mail service between Wellington and Masterton. And when you think about it, fortnightly, in those days was pretty good. And these days, we do tend to complain if the courier hasn't arrived, because I had a courier due yesterday, and I was a bit grumpy when he hadn't arrived. He was bringing some wine, and I wanted some. So I should be a bit more patient sometimes, shouldn't I? Okay, let's have another song. So what have I got now? I've got a lovely song. It's a Burns song, written by Robert Burns, put to an old piece of music, because Burns wasn't a musician particularly. He just borrowed pieces of music that had been around for a while. And this one's called Wild Mountain Side. And I think it seems appropriate for the Rimatakas. So here we go. Wild Mountain Side, sung by Wilkie Mack, Lynn Wilkinson and Michael McKinnon.
Within grasp, hear the islands call. The last mile is upon us. I'll carry you if you fall. I know the armor's heavy now. I know the heart is tired. It's beautiful just over the wild mountainside. Snow is falling all over, out of clear blue sky. Crow is flying high over. You and I are going to wander high up where the air is rare and wild horses ride. It's beautiful, let's go over the wild mountainside. Wild and free we roam, only a mile to go. Within grasp, hear the highlands call. The last mile is upon us. I'll carry you if you fall. I know the armor's heavy now. I know the heart inside. It's beautiful, let's go over the wild mountainside. It's beautiful, just roaming the wild mountainside.
Wild Mountainside, very pretty song and very appropriate for talking about the Wairarapa. I just picked up in the Cobblestones Chronicle this lovely little piece about Mr. A. Bowers, who lately obtained the contract for carrying the mail between the Greytown Post Office and the railway station, has imported a new bus, which is a decided improvement on the old one. The Pride of the Valley, as it is called, is now running to and fro on the arrival of every train. And of course, the train station was built about 7 kilometres north of Greytown. And the Pride of the Valley, which is the beautiful coach, a beautiful yellow coach, not a bus as we think about it, but a coach, is in Cobblestones Museum. So you can come and see it there at any time. And it's a very pretty coach. It was found and rescued from being used as a hen house in a farmyard, and it was restored. And it really is worth coming to see it. It's a lovely, lovely coach. And I thought I'd finish up today with another tune. And this one is Oscar Peterson and Stefan Grappelli, Making Whoopee. And I thought that is kind of appropriate because when the mail arrived, because that was why he was going backwards and forwards, because he was bringing the mail from the train station, I thought, when the mail arrived, we'd really enjoy it. Here we go. Oscar Peterson and Stefan Grappelli, Making Whoopee. Well, that was Oscar Peterson and Stefan Grappelli playing Making Whoopee. And it's time for me to sign off now. And I'm going to be making whoopee in a couple of days' time because I'm going off on holiday. So I won't be here for a few weeks, but I know that Arrow FM are going to play a few repeats of some of the programs that I've recorded. So I hope you enjoy re-listening to some of your favourites, I hope, because I'm off to see my family in the UK, and I feel very fortunate that I'm able to go and see them. It's 5 years since I saw them last because of COVID and many other things. So as you can imagine, spending time with my sister and my in-laws is very important to me. So, thank you for listening today. Wish me bon voyage, and I'm sure I'll have some more stories. I'm going to be in Plymouth, so, and of course, Plymouth to New Plymouth was one of the early settler roots. So I'm going to see what I can find out when I'm in there. So I hope you stay warm, stay dry, and stay safe. Until the next time, that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.